Scott Cawthon is undeniably best known as being the creator of the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise, which includes over a dozen games, that includes both mainline and spin-offs, over 30 books, which somehow get even more crazy than the games, an upcoming movie, and many lines of merchandise which range from just okay to almost vomit-inducing, and we all kind of know that, and we know how absurd this series can get, but we love it for it. But what most of us don't know is about the secret underbelly of this series, and the many failed games and projects Scott Cawthon has created and then promptly buried, and they'll never be seen by anyone except for those who are brave enough to reach into the darkness and find them. FNAF has been around for a while, and the most recent games in the franchise have had pretty normal development times. We knew about Security Breach for over 2 years before it came out, which, in the video game industry, is pretty standard. But it drove the fanbase insane because we were used to seeing something different. Back when the FNAF franchise was new and most of my viewers probably weren't even born yet, in other words in 2015, Scott put out FNAF games at an alarming rate. The first 4 games in the series all came out in the span of a year, and you might not know how crazy this is, so just take my word for it as the very trustworthy internet stranger I am. That's crazy. There's a reason that Scott put these games out so fast though. It's because he knew a lesson that most game developers do have to learn at some point in their careers. The internet is a fickle place. You can put out a fantastic game, but all it takes is 1 month, and your game and you have been forgotten. Look at how many games Markiplier has played on his YouTube channel. He has over 5,000 YouTube videos, and in most of them, he plays at least one game. How many of those games can you name? I can't name many. How many do you remember? How many have you played? Scott had made countless games before FNAF, so he knew about this trap of obscurity very well. Scott knew that even after the initial meteoric success that his games saw, he couldn't rest on his laurels. If he didn't act fast, he could very well be swept under the rug and crushed by the endless march of the internet as it moves on to the next fad and the next big thing, which would leave FNAF as just a forgotten memory in the minds of a handful of people, whether or not it deserved that fate. But how did Scott know this? How was he able to keep his franchise alive where so many other horror games had failed? Well, there's something to be said about FNAF's engaging, simple gameplay, or its instantly recognizable characters, or its fascinating lore, but the reason that Scott knew that wouldn't be enough is because of the experiences he had just a few years prior, where he learned of the earth-shattering weight of the internet and how it could very easily destroy everything that he could ever painstakingly build up. When you love a project and you have a drive to create something beautiful, you want to put your entire life towards that thing to make it as good as it can possibly be, and that's what Scott felt when he was working on his newest game in 2012. Scott had made games for years before this, but I've talked about all that before. I want to focus in on this one game in particular, one game that you've probably never played, even though it's made by a man who might be your favorite game developer. This game is called The Desolate Hope. Now, Scott worked on this game for a while. It's hard to say exactly how long The Desolate Hope was in development, but based on the time it took to make his later games, it had to have been several months at least. And when it finally came out, The Desolate Hope was glorious. It featured a unique and artfully dark story, incredibly complex sci-fi visuals, and flawed yet robust gameplay that felt separate from any other game on the market. Each time you play this game, you notice new details that you missed the last time. In fact, the game is littered with little things that feel strangely reminiscent of FNAF games that Scott would later create. Playing this game as a non-FNAF fan is interesting enough, but it's a whole other experience if you played Scott's more recent games, because all kinds of things will jump out to you. Look at this oddly familiar bear character who looks just like Funtime Freddy's endoskeleton, or this purple robot who seems straight out of FNAF 4, or this Ennard guy. Personally, I started theorizing about how this game's lore may be loosely connected to FNAF's. With both being sci-fi games about robots, there's the potential for that. However, unlikely it may be, but I'll let any theorists watching this think about that little hypothesis on their own time. But, of course, things that make us go, ugh, that's FNAF, don't make a game good on their own. Things that we see now as Easter eggs and references don't make a game enjoyable, and you have to have good gameplay and a good story to do that, and thankfully, The Desolate Hope does not slack in those departments. Desolate Hope has very interesting and unique gameplay that can be a little daunting to get the hang of at first because of its uniqueness, but once you do, I find that it's really fun and varied. The battle mechanics are interesting, they make fights tense and engaging, and the platforming elements don't stand out as much as you might expect them to in a game like this. I find that they're really enjoyable and really creative, and you can kind of see how those skills have carried over into Scott's later games, even after FNAF, like Freddy in Space 2, which was also a platformer that reminded me very much of the platforming elements in this game. The one thing I've seen this game praised for the most is its graphics. It's stunning, and highly reminiscent of older PC games from a bygone era. The technological environments of this game are so intricate and detailed, and beyond that of anything we've seen in the FNAF series. That's not a diss to the FNAF series, it just means that the space station here will naturally be able to have more detailed environments than a fairly simple pizzeria will. I mean, look at the wall texture, and the snaking cords in front of it, suspending this sad-looking robot in mid-air like a lifeless corpse, while small pinpricks of light speckle the room like distant fiery stars. Look at the simulation of a natural environment that somehow feels biological, yet artificial at the same time. I can't imagine how much work must have gone into these visuals, but I hope Scott tells us one day because I'd love to know more about the development of this game. And apart from the gameplay and visuals, I think the Desolate Hope's story is one that you'll really find interesting as well. Especially if you like the FNAF games. Without getting into all the granular details of this story, the Desolate Hope goes something like this. Far off in the distant regions of space, there is a space station. Lune Infinis was designed to determine if humanity could live on this planet far from Earth. It dutifully ran its simulations, explored the planet it found itself on, and served its humans for as long as they needed it, constantly in contact with humans to collaborate and find a new home that all Earth dwellers could be proud of. Until one day, the communication with Earth stopped, and the dark recesses of space grew silent. Even after the communication between Earth and Lune Infinis ended, these simulations kept running. And slowly, as these robots' minds churned and worked tirelessly for decades, they started to grow twisted and warped and dangerous. All the worse is the fact that an unknown computer virus also starts to take hold of this space station, which makes things just even more hectic for our hero. Who is this hero, you may ask? Well, it's a lone, walking coffee pot, and that's not a joke. The main character of this game is a coffee pot, but you're too far into the video to click off now, so we're gonna keep going. Anyway, the journey that this little guy goes on is a dangerous one, and in the end, he is able to defeat the final boss, but it's at a cost. And I don't really want to spoil too much for you in case you want to play this game for yourself. It's free after all, and even before it was free, it was only $1, so like really, how much are you risking by buying this game even before it was free? But spoilers aside, the game tackles some really rich themes of hope in spite of loneliness, and the purpose of life, and all really deep and thoughtful things, and well, the Desolate Hope came out, and it vanished into the abyss. Just like every one of Scott Cawthon's games before that, it came out, and apart from a few people who really enjoyed it, it was largely forgotten, vanishing into the darkest corners of the internet. Scott put his heart and soul into this game, but the internet did not reciprocate that, and that's a feeling that a lot of game developers know very well. You can put out a game that you put countless hours into, and it just doesn't see the attention that you hoped for it. And I just wanted to talk about this game, but now I've made things super depressing, and I do that a lot, which is maybe part of the reason why a lot of people really don't like talking to me. This wasn't the straw that broke the camel's back for Scott. It would be his later game, Chipper & Sons, that would be heavily criticized for its kind of creepy characters, and I mean, that's a valid complaint, man! This would weigh on Scott more than anything else had. Scott had told all kinds of stories at this point, yet no one cared. And those who did sneered at his attempts at making games. Now, there's rumors and stories that Scott had been in some groups of people and other game developers who did appreciate his games, but the vast public did not. But of course, there is a happy ending to this story, and we all know it. These failures did end up spurring Scott on to create one of the biggest game franchises of the 21st century, Five Nights at Freddy's, and Scott is now laughing all the way to the bank, so we can't feel too bad for him. He's filthy rich now. Scott's story is undoubtedly one of massive success, and it's easy now to ignore the many years of failure as a game developer that he suffered before making his magnum opus. In another universe, he could have just as easily never broken through to the mainstream with FNAF, and maybe after Chipper & Sons he could have given up entirely, never receiving the proper credit for his work. Before FNAF's success, Scott has mentioned that he remembered seeing exactly one piece of fan art for The Desolate Hope. That one piece of fan art meant so much to him at the time because it was singular. It was one of the few times that Scott could share his creation with another person and receive their creation in return. And nowadays, Scott probably has hundreds of thousands of pieces of fan art surrounding his characters, and even if some of it is very concerning, it's super cool to see him get the recognition he wanted for so long. Scott still makes other games. It's clear that he doesn't just want to make scary games over and over again, and since FNAF exploded in popularity, he's made RPGs and platformers and whatever this thing is, and the spirit of games like Chipper & Sons and The Desolate Hope have never really died. Scott still clearly has a passion for them, and while those games will never receive the same amount of attention as his more popular works, I think it's good that he enjoys making them and has never stopped putting time into those passion projects. When you find your audience as a creative person, it's easy to feel pigeonholed into only making the types of things that other people want you to create. I made a bunch of comic dubs one time, and now on every video there's at least a few comments begging for more, even though I'm trying to make new and exciting things that appeal to me. And I don't blame anyone for wanting that. The things I've made in the past seem to have spoken to them, and they love to see more, but one lesson that I took a long time to realize is that the most important thing is to always continue to chase after new things to create that are interesting to me personally. Things that I'm scared to mess up on, and things that I do mess up on, so I continue to get better and broaden my skills.
That's right, this video's getting personal now.
Look, I know how to make a comic dub, and allow me to brag for 5 seconds and say that I made some good ones, but I don't know how to make a video essay. That's why I'm learning to do that next. These past few videos haven't seen the massive audience as the things I made before. My last video got 1,000 times less views than that one FNAF comic dub did, but the people who did watch it really resonated with it, and it's super cool to see that I have a group of people, however small it may be, who are excited to see what I'm going to do next. That being said, you should definitely watch that video, I think it's really good. The comic dubs were really fun to make, and now these are really fun to make, and I'm going to keep making really fun to make things. My audience has always been really cool, even when it was only a couple dozen people, but there's so many more talented people than I am who don't have any audience to speak of. I mentioned before that there's thousands of game developers just like Scott who are constantly looking for their big break, and most will never find it, and that's why after each video from now on, in addition to shouting out my patrons, I'm also going to try to shout out a random small channel that I think makes really impressive content. I don't know how effective it'll be at giving them more of an audience, but it's the least I can do to help out other creators, so stick around to the end to see who I'll be shouting out this time. Also, please don't ask for shoutouts. This is a decision I'm making on my own, and often if you ask for a shoutout, it just makes me want to not give you a shoutout, so please don't do that. Thanks. In the same way, you can also help out creators on your own, even if you don't have much of a following. If you want to help the next Scott Cawthon find their success, go on GameJolt or Steam or itch.io to just find a game that looks interesting to you that you think deserves more attention, and trust me, just a few kind words about someone's personal project can mean a lot to them. Scott Cawthon himself has taken time to help small game developers spread their wings and make careers out of what they love to do, when he announced the Fazbear Fanverse initiative, a program where he personally funds smaller fan game developers to allow them to make the games that they would otherwise never be able to create. I think that with things like the Fazbear Fanverse, Scott's generosity really shines through, and again, it becomes clear that he's very familiar with the struggles that a small game developer can have. I think it's a really cool project, and a way to give back to the community that, after many long years, finally found Scott and allowed him to tell his greatest, most expansive story of all time.
The Desolate Hope is a game about one lonely creature, or coffee pot, in the middle of a vast, empty universe, just trying to do good for anyone who maybe will one day be around to appreciate it. When you're making things but you don't have an audience, it's very easy to feel that same type of solitude when you just want to make something for someone, but there's no one there. But it's also important to remember that the word hope is literally in the title, and that's kind of the most important part of the game, because all it takes is one kind YouTube comment or a really nice game review for the thing that you spent hours on, and it can just completely change a person's mindset and give them hope to make the next big thing that maybe people will resonate with even more. That's what keeps creative people going, and as long as we continue to give that type of appreciation, it's what'll continue to keep creative people going well into the future.
Hey, as always, thank you for watching today's video. It seems like you liked it if you made it all the way to the end. I'd like to give a special shout out to all my patrons, as I always do, and today that includes SketchArt, Evan Ogredano, Connor Stearman, Luna is the best, and Danny Winthorpe, who is our newest patron. Thank you for joining. If you'd like to become a patron, you can use the link on screen. Oh, I can talk, I promise. And I'd like to also, as I mentioned earlier in the video, give a shout out to a specific channel that I think makes really interesting and exciting content that hopefully you're willing to check out, because I think if you like this video, you will like their videos. This is Soular, who makes FNAF video essays, so I mean, their latest one is on Security Breach Ruin, and I think it's really good. They only have about 100 subscribers, so I think they deserve a lot more. The link is in the description to their channel, along with my Patreon page. Feel free to check those out. That's all I'm going to plug for this video. Don't worry, I won't ask you to do any more things. Okay, this is like the longest end screen that I've ever had, so I should really go now. I should really not make this any longer. I'm done. Okay, goodbye. Bye.